Hey, thanks for stopping by the NFN Radio News Podcast, brought to you by NotFakeNews.biz. I'm Bob Gaddy, editor and publisher of Not Fake News. Justin Long never felt comfortable in his own skin. After years of physical and psychological abuse from his parents, he was a self-loathing stranger to love. But at 32, he faced up to the fact that his existence had become a downward spiral of alcoholism and despair. Knowing something had to change, Justin sought help and got sober. But defeating addiction was just the start of his journey of endurance and revelation. Committed to becoming whole, he fought through his cynicism about men and counseling in order to resolve his underlying pain and rise above his past. Now he's written a book about those experiences. It's called The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy, A Journey of Self-Discovery. It's a narrative of Justin's battle, unflinchingly honest, offering encouragement to those who face similar challenges every single day. Justin is our guest in this episode of the NFN Radio News Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on NFN Radio News. Tell me a little bit about who you are and what's your story. What's it all about?
Well, my name is Justin B. Long, not to be confused with the actor Justin Long, who is probably a little better looking and makes a lot more money than I do. But so I got sober when I was 32, and that was in 2008. And a couple of years into that, I met a guy named Roland Mora, who became my mentor and changed everything about my life. And Roland was an old, gay, one-eyed Apache Vietnam veteran, and he talked about Zen and mindfulness and self-awareness, and like he had a lot of what I wanted. And I started working with him. He used an analogy one time that really resonated with me. And he said, if you throw a rock off the top of a skyscraper, it's so far up in the air that it doesn't know it's falling. As far as the rock knows, it's flying, and it won't know anything different until it gets to the ground. Like that just resonated with me so strongly, because my entire life, from the day I was born until I was 32, I was falling and I didn't know it. I thought I was flying. My parents had no emotional tools to give to me to help me go out into the world as a healthy, functioning adult. I didn't have any of the things that a child needs growing up to really feel good about themselves and have tools to deal with adversity and all of that stuff that's important. I created my own analogy that I like. I call it my space analogy. And that, if I was a comet, I was formed in my parents' star system, but my parents didn't have all of the elements necessary to form a complete being. They only had a few things. And so when I managed to separate from their gravity field and shoot out into space when I was 18, I was missing a lot of the things that I needed to form my own star system. And I cruised aimlessly and without direction, without propulsion, without any self-awareness at all until I was in my 30s. And fortunately, I managed to get close enough to Roland's gravity field that I got pulled into his star system. And he gave me a lot of the elements that I needed. And he taught me how to think. He taught me how to become self-aware and figure out what was wrong and what was missing, and how to fly on my own so that I could cruise around the universe and find those things that I needed to fill in the gaps. And the wonderful thing about all of this is that I'm starting to get into the territory where Roland was at, where I have enough elements to be whole, and I also have enough left over to help other people kind of figure out what they're missing and add to their wellness as a human being. And so that's where I'm at now. I am recovering from child abuse and trauma. I'm recovering from alcoholism, and I'm recovering from a complete lack of self-awareness. And I'm trying to apologize to the world by making it a better place and helping others figure out what they've got going on.
Well, I read a good chunk of your book, Justin, and it's really clear that in the first few chapters where you talk about your father and his penchant for using the board on you when you failed to, for example, stack the firewood perfectly straight. That just had to be an awfully tough situation for you as a young child growing up into young adulthood. Um, you said you didn't have the tools that you needed. What do you mean? What tools?
The emotional spectrum is pretty broad, and I think there's something like 27 primary emotions that we have, right? And in watching my dad, who was my figure to be unquestioned and to guide all actions and activities, my dad expressed rage, and he expressed rage, and that was it. He had rage, and so that was his answer to everything, whether it was good or bad or indifferent. He was mad about it, and there were so many other feelings that I had, and I never got to see him or anybody else around me deal with emotions other than rage. So I knew how to break things. I knew how to get mad and shout and tell people all of the things that I thought about them. I knew how to throw stuff, but I didn't know how to feel happy. I didn't know what to do with myself when I felt happy. I didn't know how to be scared. I didn't know that an emotion would go away and that it's okay to feel what I'm feeling. I didn't know any of those things. So by the time I was in high school, I found drinking, and that made it okay for me to feel what I was feeling. And that was the first time that I'd ever felt okay.
So you started drinking in high school?
I did. I was 13 the first time that I got drunk. Yeah, by the time I was in high school, I was drinking every weekend.
Did you date?
No, but not by choice. I wanted to. But I will
Uh,
tell you, as a wildly emotionally insecure, 16, 17, 18-year-old boy, I had nothing to offer anybody because I was so desperate for attention. I was desperate for approval. I was the epitome of a people pleaser. I would grovel at a girl's feet and just be over the top in my efforts. And of course, that's not appealing to a girl because I didn't have any self confidence. I didn't have anything other than let me tell you how great you are and how wonderful you are and how pretty you are, and I had no way to value a woman. I didn't understand what made them important other than the fact that they were pretty. So I really brought nothing to the table in that regard. So I understand why they wanted nothing to do with me.
hmm. So, but you're married now. Obviously, you've and you're sober.
Yeah,
And congratulations to you for that. And you've got a great
I
wife.
do.
She's a vet, and you guys have a great business together now, and that's just awesome. But in what way? How did you how did you get away from the booze? What did you do? I mean, how did you realize? What made you realize that you needed to do that? And what gave you the courage to do that?
You know, so many people have a great big exciting explosive rock bottom that they hit,
Yeah.
but I didn't have one of those. I had a really slow, long, drug out period of years where that feeling okay happened less and less and less. And I kept having to drink more and more and more to get that feeling. And I understood that alcohol was a tool for me, and I used it to feel better about myself and the world around me. But it never occurred to me that it was contributing to my problems the farther I went. And I think by the time I was 26, 27 years old, I really could not fathom the idea of not drinking. So I knew by the time I was 30, 31, 32, I knew that I had a drinking problem, but I felt that I was broken. I knew there was something wrong in my head, but I couldn't commit myself to a mental hospital because you can't drink in there, and I couldn't imagine not drinking. But the drinking wasn't working anymore either. So um, I had a guy that I worked with that we used to sit together in the mornings, and I was a mechanic at an army base at that point, and we would sit out behind the building and smoke cigarettes and sweat out our hangovers together and commiserate about how miserable we were. And he mentioned the idea of going to an AA meeting once. And until that moment, it had never, ever occurred to me that I might do something like that. But I thought a lot of this guy. He was a likable guy, and
Uh-huh.
I felt like he was cool. So if it was cool enough for him to do, then it was cool enough for me to do. So I
Mhm.
went home that day and drank my last 3 beers while I read through the AA website and discovered there was a meeting right down the street from me, like 2 blocks from my house. So if that's not serendipitous, I don't know what is. But um, but it was like 3 days, so I didn't drink for 3 days while I waited to
Mhm.
go to this AA meeting and see what it was all about. And I went there with the intention of finding a way to control my drinking. I wanted to be able to have 4 or 5 beers and still feel okay about myself and not do anything stupid that I was going to be embarrassed about. Because at that point, the shame monster was just eating me alive. Like I had done so many stupid things while I was drinking that I couldn't hardly be around people because I was afraid that I would make a scene that I would then beat myself up about for the next week. So it was really, I was so tired of that feeling that of every morning I would wake up feeling shame and just beating my body to death. And when you drink a lot, you smoke a lot. And so I was smoking like a chimney, and that was starting to have an effect on me. And I just, to use the cliche, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I felt horrible all the time. I felt horrible when I was sober, and I still felt horrible when I was drinking, and something had to give. And when I went to that AA meeting for the very first time in my life, there was probably 20 people in there, and I heard a group of people talking about, they took turns one at a time telling their stories about how they felt the exact same way I felt, and they had feelings and nobody else seemed to have feelings. Everybody else around them seemed to have it together, and they didn't have it together. And I was like, I recognize all of those things. I have all of those things. These people get me. And that was enough to get me to come back. And then I came back again, and I came
Mhm.
back again, and I kept listening to people talk about feelings and emotions and like not feeling like they fit into the hole that they're supposed to fit into in life, and comparing their insides to other people's outsides and coming up short and misunderstanding what gives them value, what takes away their value, what makes them an okay person, and all of these things, like stuff you don't ever talk about with anybody. I was in the Army. I worked for the Army for a long time. I've done a lot of different jobs, and it's all mainly men talking about
Right.
how tough they are and how many women they've slept with. Nobody ever talks about how they feel about anything. And so,
Uh-huh.
again, that problem that I had as a kid, not having any idea how to feel the feelings that I had, I still had that when I was 32 years old. Still have it at 45. So I'm learning to get the hang of that stuff now and understand that it's okay to feel what I feel. But I was 32 years old before I ever even knew that there were other people that had that, and that it's okay to have feelings.
So when did you join the Army?
I joined the Army when I was a junior in high school. That was my escape plan from home.
Okay.
I joined the National Guard.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your escape plan was.
Yep,
Yeah,
and it worked. It
yeah.
got me out of the house
I knew
and
you had
gone.
to have one.
I planned that for years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I knew you had to have an escape plan.
I started mapping that out when I was a little kid.
Did you? So you were in the Army. What'd you do in the Army?
I was a heavy equipment operator, 62 Echo, but mostly what I did in the Army was drink. That was, I was away from home, and even though I wasn't old enough to buy it, I lived in the barracks and I had unlimited supply to alcohol, and we drank every day. So I would get up in the morning and go to work, and I had a group of friends that I really liked. We all lived together, and they partied like I partied, and we would get off work at 4 o'clock and come home and drink till midnight. And I did that every day for 3 years.
Did you do drugs besides booze or just booze?
I smoked a lot of weed when I was in the Army. I
Yeah.
do think it's funny. The Army has the strict drug test policy and all the stuff, and I did all of my drugs in the Army. but that's where I had access to them. There's an awful lot of drugs in the Army, but there's also a lot of toxic masculinity and emotional suppression and that kind of stuff in the military too. It's just the environment breeds that stuff, and there's a lack of tools for dealing with all that. A lot of trauma happens to people in the military, and I was a civilian before I went to Iraq and got to see all the stuff that gives soldiers PTSD. But
So you went to Iraq. You were as a civilian?
Yeah, yeah. I was in the Iraq invasion in 2003. I went as a civilian truck driver. I worked for KBR, and I drove the big trucks that hauled tanks and Bradleys and all that stuff up to their bases in Iraq, and brought the old crews out when they were rotating out. So I did a lot of drinking in that job too, believe it or not. It was because that was my tool, and you can buy it off the side of the road in Kuwait and Iraq. There's people selling booze and cigarettes on the side of the road, and you have no idea what you're getting. But that's one of those behaviors that A, it was strictly forbidden. I could have lost my job in a second. And B, it's horribly dangerous to buy a bottle off a stranger on the side of the road in a war zone and then drink the contents, right? Like, you have no idea what's in there. But when when you're at that point of emotional dysfunction, those are the self-destructive decisions that you make. Like, I couldn't see those things about
I
myself.
guess you didn't really care, right?
I didn't. I was okay with dying. That's part of the reason that I went. I wanted some excitement, see something amazing, kind of get what they call the thrill-seeking behavior, when you start trying to find worse and worse ways to get your heart rate up and feel like you're alive. Well, that was one of the things I did. And when you put it all down in a list of behaviors, which I did when I got sober, I had to go through this workbook and make a list of things that normal people do not do. Those things that I never thought about at the time are a giant flashing warning sign that I am a broken human being. There is something seriously wrong with me that I'm not dealing with. And I just, my life was a succession of those things. And they started out small and they got bigger and bigger and bigger. But you can't keep going like that indefinitely. Something will happen.
We're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, Justin is going to explain what he means by the difference between power and strength.
I've spent a lot of time in therapy, and I have learned that almost everything that I have known in life I've had backward. That's one power thing, is something that I never questioned. My dad ruled me with an iron fist. He had absolute power over me. And right from as early as I can remember, he drilled things into my head that you don't ever question Dad. Dad is always right. And so that became my guiding light of how to be, right? So I started equating, at some point along the line, I started equating the fact that he seemed to be omnipotent. He had all power. I had none. I wanted to be like him. And I started understanding that power is what gives you value as a human being. The ability to dominate someone else, to totally rule over someone else's existence, is what makes you a 100% person. I never got there. I never ever got there. I never got power over anybody. And so I kept feeling like a failure. But I also developed a resentment about that, like, the sour grapes thing. And so I carried forward. Let me take one step back. When I got to the Army, they reinforced all of that stuff. They reinforced that everyone has absolute power over you and that you don't question authority. And so that really set it all in concrete after 3 years in the Army following my dad. And so by the time I got out of that, I just never questioned the idea that power is what I want. I want to be able to control somebody else. I want to be able to dominate somebody else, because then I'll feel okay about me. And only last year, 2020, did I come to understand in an amazing therapy session that strength, it's completely different. Power is the ability to influence others, and strength is the ability to withstand pressure, right? And when I look at all of the things that I think are important about character and my character today, who I'm trying to be, I am trying to be strong. I'm trying to not sacrifice my values. I don't want to change who I am to fit someone else's expectation. And none of those things have anything to do with power. Those have to do with strength. Power is just a function of position. My supervisor at work has power over me. In reality, my supervisor at work has probably 10% power over me, right? They can dictate my activities that I'm there to getting paid to do. But because I'm an emotional extremist, I'm giving them 100% power over me, and then I'm resenting them for having all that power over me, and I don't have power over anybody. But the reality is that power is meaningless. It's all it does is make society function. It doesn't make any person better than another person. A policeman on the side of the road pulling me over has the power to take $50 from me for speeding. He doesn't have the power to take away my value and to demean who I am as a human being. A supervisor doesn't have the ability to do that. My dad doesn't have the ability to do that. No one can do that except for me. And I finally understand that I I can be proud of myself for my strength, not my ability to dominate somebody else.
You talked about toxically masculine ideas surrounding men and their emotions. You talked about that in context of the Army. You want to explain a little bit more about what you're talking about?
I do. It's something that's near and dear to my heart because my dad, I think, was the epitome of toxic masculinity. The only thing that he ever said in terms of supporting anyone, he would tell my mom that he loved her, but he didn't know how to show that in any way, right? So all he knew how to do was be in charge and to try to dominate things. And I see that same behavior in so many people. They feel like the only way to get respect from someone else is to be stronger and tougher and louder and bigger. I had this when I was in high school. I wanted the big monster truck with the jacked up, giant wheels on it and the super loud exhaust. And because I felt like people would think that I was tough if I had that, right? And I did as an adult. I got the Harley with the loud exhaust on it, so people would think that I was tough and scary. I think that boys are raised and turn into men with the understanding that the way to succeed in life is to be more powerful than everybody around you, to be scarier, to be tougher, to be meaner, to not take shit off anybody, right? But what does that stuff do for you? It does nothing. All it does is make the world a dangerous place to be because everybody's running around with something to prove. Well, that's also the reason that boys like me launch into the world with no emotional tools, because we don't acknowledge that we have the other 26 emotions, and then we don't know how to deal with any of those. I think that's a major thing behind men's mistreatment of women in the world, and how we sexualize women and don't give them any credibility in any other way. If you're pretty, that's great. If you're not pretty, you better be a good cook, right? That is totally, like, you would never say that to a man. And that very concept, I think, is at the core of so much of what is wrong with this country. Our past president was laden with all of these needs to be approved by people. He had so many things that just screamed that he was missing all of the same elements that I was missing as a kid. And I am so glad that I have managed to collect some of those tools and turn my life around, because I would probably end up being the same kind of person that he is. And a lot of people do. And I think that that's tragic and it's unnecessary. And it's all about toxic masculinity and what the ideas, the misconceptions of what makes a man and what you need to do to be accepted in this world. I think it's really hard to get men to change, but it's possible. But I think the real avenue towards addressing this is women raising their sons in a way that allows them to understand what feelings are, and that it's okay to have these feelings, and how to value themselves and not have to dominate other people in order to feel good about themselves.
I wanted to ask you what it took for you to transition from the type of childhood and adolescence that you had and the experience that you had in the military with your drinking and thrill chasing, etc., to the point where you married a young woman who became a veterinarian. You've got a thriving business, obviously a great relationship. You've written books about her and about your relationship. What happened in the middle?
A lot, an awful lot.
Uh-huh.
Are you familiar with the term ACE, the adverse childhood experiences?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a list of 10 of those, and I had five out of the 10. So I'm at a moderately high risk of all kinds of things, right? So people that have more than 4 of those adverse childhood experiences are way more likely to be alcoholics and drug addicts and suicidal and bounce from job to job to job and never get anywhere. And I was I was the poster child for that. I had all the stuff, right? The thing that I didn't have, which is what I have now, the thing that made all the difference is self-awareness. Self-awareness is the key. Like, you can't change yourself and you can't become something better until you understand where you are and who you are and why you are. And that's what Roland did for me. My mentor spent 4 or 5 years helping me learn how to look at myself and identify who I really am. Because part of growing up that way and trying to draw your value from what you think other people think of you is that you end up wearing layers and layers of masks. Like I had no concept of what my real identity was anymore because I had spent years trying to be who I thought the people around me wanted me to be. We talked about not having a girlfriend in high school because I was an over the top people pleaser. So what I learned in the army is that the guys that were the jerks are the ones that end up with the girls. And so I worked really hard at becoming a jerk. I focused a lot of effort on not being nice to women, trying to show everybody that I can be a redneck or a biker or whoever it is that I think is, might give me some approval, right? So I had no idea who I was by the time I was 32. I hadn't even acknowledged the real Justin in a long time. So Roland and I spent years digging down to the core of what I like to do. What is it that makes me who I am and not what I think other people want me to be? And I will tell you that is the hardest thing that I've ever done, but also the most worthwhile thing that I've ever done. But, here's a ridiculous thing. So many of my beliefs I got from my parents, right? And you don't ever question that stuff. And that was one of the things that we did was question all of the beliefs that I have about everything that I got from my parents. Whether it was political, religious, simple things like, on the rare occasion that we had a steak, my dad always burned it to a crisp. And he said, that's how you enjoy a good steak. So I was almost 40 years old before I found out that a steak should be eaten rare. And it's amazing because up until that point, I always burned them to a crisp and they were terrible. It's like shoe leather. But I never questioned that because that's how my dad said it's done, right? But when all of this
Oh,
stuff
man.
happens in your formative years, you just launch into the world with a head full of scrambled up ideas. And I'm still overcoming all these things. Like one I'm working on right now is that it's okay for me to have fun. 'Cause my dad's concept was that if you're having fun, then you're not working hard enough. 'Cause my dad was a workaholic. But, trying to untrain my brain on 100 million of those things and start from scratch on what do I believe? How would I handle this situation if nobody was in the room to judge me? There was nobody to impress. What would I want to do with this? I found out that I like painting. I found out I like playing guitars. I formed a band and it was fantastic. I wrote songs. I found out I like writing. I like things that 25-year-old Justin would have thought were effeminate and girly and sissy. And I never would have gave him the time of day. And you know what? I was missing out on all the things that I am the most passionate about
Uh,
because I was trying to meet someone else's idea of manliness, right? And I'm still discovering things all the time. I was 32 when I quit drinking. I was 38, I think 39 when I met Erica, who became my wife. And I had a life partner all through my drinking days. She was my drinking buddy, and we moved in together and never got married, but we managed to limp that along for over 10 years. But that was a relationship that was so toxic because I had no emotional tools to bring to the table. She didn't have very many. And our commonality was that we both liked to drink. But learning how to be in a relationship, I didn't have any of those tools either. I didn't understand what a relationship was other than sex. I had no idea what a man and a woman should be doing together when you're in a healthy relationship. So I've learned so much through therapy and just through surrounding myself with different people that are, living a quality life and understand things that I want to understand and can model a behavior for me, right? So it took 10 years of conditioning and rewiring my brain before I was even to a point where Erica would pay attention to a guy like me. She was operating in a circle that was so far removed from my circle that had I not changed my trajectory in life, had I kept going like I was going, I never ever would have crossed paths with her, because it's two different universes. But I changed enough about myself that um, that when I found her, we met on eHarmony, and we are one of those rare success stories. I think she liked what she saw, and I liked what I saw, and we managed to merge worlds. But if I was measuring myself on a scale, I would say I was at a 4 on understanding myself at that point, and now I'm probably closer to a 7. But she has taught me so much about, I think, the next level of understanding the world and people. She's a horse veterinarian, and one of the things I've learned about being a horse veterinarian is that it's 99% talking to people and understanding people, because the medicine is relatively easy compared to explaining things to the owners and finding compliance and ways to get around financial constraints and everything else. But she's attacked all the time because of the cost of doing medicine, and the horse died, and how come we didn't stop that from happening, things like that. And she has never exploded on somebody and freaked out and yelled and thrown stuff and like all of the tools that I had for dealing with life, right? She is so composed and able to reason with people and empathize and understand where they're coming from. Those are the tools that I'm looking for. That's functioning in a world that's not perfect and not making it worse, right? And I admire that so much about her. And she's taught me a million things like that. It's amazing.
She seems like exactly the antidote that you needed for where you were in your life,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
you
She
know?
has she has faith in me. I think that's one of the big things. She has faith in me and she supports me when I want to do something. I started my writing career after we got married, and she supported me 100% in that. And it sort of threw me for a loop. I didn't know how to accept her support, because that's another tool I didn't have. I didn't know how to accept support. I didn't know how to accept a compliment. I didn't know how to accept help. And she's taught me how to do those things, which are important life skills, I will tell you. Um, but supporting a partner in their endeavors, no matter what it is so incredibly liberating and empowering. It has been for me. Like, she makes me feel like I can do anything I want to do. And maybe I can, maybe I can't. But having someone telling me, yes, you can, and I will help you in any way that I can, is so different from someone saying, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money, this is stupid. You need to go do a regular job like everybody else, right?
Uh,
I've just,
I understand that.
it's introduced me to a whole different way of living and being.
Yeah,
It's incredible.
yeah. Well, it seems like it's been a godsend for you. Now you live on a horse farm, right? I mean, is that what you where you live? You live on a horse farm?
I do. We've got 6 horses, 2 donkeys, 5 sheep, dogs and cats. Like,
Would you ever have dreamed it? I mean,
not in a million years. Not in a million years. We bought a tractor about 6 months ago, and so I'm a researcher. I like
yeah.
learning all the things, and I thought about that when I was shopping for this tractor. It's like I am sitting here shopping for a tractor. Like, I can't even fathom that. What am I doing? But I am now a tractor expert,
Ah,
at least on paper. But once I got on it, I realized I still didn't know anything about it. So, but I'm learning how to be a tractor owner. It's like, but crazy things that are happening in my life. You know,
well,
I was a truck driver. Part of being a heavy equipment operator in the truck or in the Army is driving the truck that hauls the equipment around. And
right.
I never thought that I would ever need that skill again. And then, 20 years later, here I am, pulling a 30-foot horse trailer around, taking her to horse shows and stuff. So, it's funny how the skills that I've gained along the way have helped me prepare me to be married to her. 'Cause I've needed a lot of them.
So this life, you're happy in this life, right?
My life is so incredible. It's I tell people all the time that if I had sat down at 25 and tried to write out the perfect life the way I would want things to go, I would have sold myself so short. There's just no way that I could imagine that I could feel this good about myself and be surrounded with people that are amazing and have an incredible wife. Like, I just didn't know all this existed.
Hey, you know what, Justin? We have about 10 more minutes and we haven't talked about your book. We should do that.
Ah, yes. Yes. So I do have a book,
What's it called?
The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy is my new book.
Well, let's talk about
It's
it.
basically a chronicle of my therapy over 2020. I went to weekly therapy, and I was working on rage issues. I felt like I had an anger problem, not really rage, but I still get mad at all kinds of stuff. Every time I talk to AT&T, I'm mad before they even answer the phone because I just know that's how that's going to go, right? And that that negativity that turns into anger that then sucks me into the pit of despair, like it sucks my will to live, just like The Machine. And I love that movie. I'm going to make references to it till I die, but that's really the way. Even though I have such amazing things going on in my life, I'm running a veterinary clinic. I'm dealing with these companies that don't care about me because I'm one number on a billion, right? And I still have insecurities that get triggered by this.
Before you go any
And
further,
so I went back to
you got
therapy
to
because
explain the pit of despair because not everybody will know what you're talking about.
that's true. If you have not seen The Princess Bride, you need to pause this podcast, go watch that, and then come back, and we'll pick right up here. We'll wait. It is such a good movie. But in the movie The Princess Bride, there's a torture chamber. The torture chamber is called the Pit of Despair, and it's where you go to be in agonizing distress, right? And AT&T could get me there in a second, just the thought of talking to them. But ultimately, it's not AT&T. So when it's everybody else, it's probably really me. Is what I know. So I went to therapy and I started journaling about what I was discovering about myself. Um, because it's too much information to keep in my head, right? Especially when I'm going on a weekly basis. Sometimes I was going twice a week, and it's information overload. But I was making such amazing progress and insights that I needed to write it down. And by the time we got through the first 15 sessions or so, I was starting to get a pretty good grasp on what my insecurities were. And it's only two or three insecurities that drive all kinds of negative behavior, right? And it's all rooted in childhood situations, childhood traumas. You were talking about my dad in the wood pile. So we heated our house with a wood stove, and my dad would go out and cut up trees and bring them home for firewood, and my job was to split it and stack it, and then fill the wood box in the house. And he had these two poles at the back end of the porch that were like 6 feet tall, and I had to maybe 15 feet apart, and I had to fill the space in between those two poles with firewood. And if a piece was sticking out the front or sticking out the back, I would get a SWAT for that. So he would come home from work every day, and we would go inspect all of my chores, and we'd go by the firewood stack, and he would make me count them, and see how many pieces. And of course, I'd already tried to shove in everything, but if I was daydreaming, I had got one down low that was sticking out. That was a SWAT. And so I would usually end up with 5 or 6 SWATs out of that. But if I tried to skip one, it would be double that.
SWATs with what?
SWATs with the board. It was always the board. My dad had a board that he made in wood shop somewhere. I don't know if he did it in college. I was so young at that point. I don't remember where he made the board, but he made a board, and that was for the sole purpose of me. And but what I learned from that is
So you would have been what? 8, 10 years
Oh,
old?
I was probably starting out at 6 or 7 stacking wood. It was
Wow.
I as far back as I can remember, I had chores like that.
Mhm.
And I was so young at that point, I couldn't swing the axe, and so we had a 16-pound sledgehammer and steel wedges that I would use to split the wood, and
Mhm.
I couldn't swing that very well either. So I was forever overshooting the wedge and breaking the head off the hammer. So, um, and I was in trouble for that too. I got in trouble for everything, and that was the whole thing that I learned is that no matter how hard I try, and no matter what I'm going to do, or no matter what I do, it's not going to be good enough, and I'm going to get punished.
Well, I read in your book that he didn't always cut those pieces of wood the same length, right?
No, no, sometimes they were long.
So it wasn't your fault.
Yeah.
And so, how did you feel about that? Did you blame him or blame yourself?
I blame myself for a lot of things, but that stuff I was so furious with the system because I wasn't allowed to question him, right? And that helplessness, being a victim of something that's completely outside of my control. I struggled with that so hard, but and sometimes I would mouth off and I would try to show him how it was his shortcoming and not mine. But that would lead to even more punishment. So eventually, I learned to just that's the way the system works. That the system is going to be stacked against you no matter what, and all the raising a ruckus about it is just going to make it worse. And I carried that resentment against people being in charge of me all the way through my working career. Every supervisor I've ever had was paying the price for my dad punishing me for doing the job that I did. Even though I did the job, I stacked all the wood. The wood box was full. I split it. The house never went cold because I didn't do my job, but I still got punished for all of it. And that was my understanding of how the world worked. And so I was a horrible employee. I was belligerent and combative with every supervisor I ever had because of the way my dad raised me, and I had no idea. I had no idea. Now, as a business owner, I hire people all the time, and I look at what makes a good team. I've learned a lot about how workplaces function and teams function, and I've learned that I was the worst employee on the planet. And it was all because of insecurities that I carried around my entire life from those childhood experiences. I think until you become aware of how you act, how you function in the world, until you become self aware to recognize that A, I'm triggered about something, and B, it has nothing to do with actually happening right now. You just keep on running around being a ball of destruction, and that's even at 13 years sober. I'm still exhibiting some of those behaviors because of my behavior is driven by my insecurities. So I have to create a new level of self awareness to recognize that when my amygdala has been hijacked and I am acting out in a negative fashion based on an insecurity, and it probably is also based on a misunderstanding from my childhood that I'm messed up when it's really not me, it was my dad, right? Like the wood pile wasn't the problem, me stacking the wood wasn't the problem. My dad was still trying to please his dad because he got beat every day in his life when he was a kid. It's a generational cycle that just doesn't ever get broken until somebody, like, I didn't have a kid. That's the only way I broke that cycle. If I had had a child, then you know it would have been grown by the time I figured all this stuff out.
So your book goes through all of the therapy sessions where you talk about this journey that you've been on, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I sit down. Uh,
Okay.
each chapter is basically a therapy session, and and
Okay.
we look at a different behavior and feeling that I'm dealing with current present day, and then we go back into the to my childhood, to the earliest time I can remember feeling that way, and we look at what happened, and we look at what beliefs I formed about myself as a result of that. Here's another example. uh, when my mom was not a disciplinarian, so she always let my dad do most of the disciplining. She liked to stick me in the corner, and I would stand in the corner until my dad got home to spank me for something. But uh, if we weren't on the inside, like, she had a sewing business that she made clothes for museums and stuff. And so a lot of that happened on the back porch. And so if we were on the back porch, there wasn't a corner for me to stand in. So she would make me pull the trash dumpster in from out behind the house and crawl inside that and sit inside the trash dumpster until my dad got home to spank me. And I formed a lot of beliefs about myself as a result of that. I would sit in that trash can, sometimes for 2 hours, and it stank and it was nasty, and the wet spots would be seeping through my clothes from the gunk on the bottom. I'd learned to think of a certain way about myself as a result of that. And 30 years later, that was still impacting my decision making and the way that I responded to certain input from other people and things that would trigger me, and I was unaware of it. So finding those things like that happened when I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old through therapy, and realizing that no, I'm not a piece of trash because my mom threw away. My mom was emotionally broken. My mom was messed up, not me. And so when I'm triggered now, I can identify the insecurity, and then I can identify the self-belief that's making me angry, and take a look at it and say, is this true or is this not true? And 10 times out of 10, it's not true. And the more I practice this, the faster it gets to where I can get mad and think it all through and figure out that it's based on a lie and this isn't the real situation. I can do that in about 10 seconds now, on a good day. On a bad day, I still go to the pit of despair and I have to think about it for 3 hours. But
the pit of despair is probably better than the bottom of that trash can.
They're probably pretty equal in a lot of ways. Yeah, I don't know. At least the guy in the pit of despair went away. They only tortured you now and then.
That's right. So, Justin, where can people get a hold of this book?
You can go to my website at jboydlong. That's BOYD, jboydlong.com. And all of my books are there. And it's also available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the online book retailers. The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy. And all my other books. If you're into horse stuff, you can find The Adventures of the Horse Doctor's Husband there too. So.
Yeah, we have a couple of seconds left, and I wanted to, because you have this podcast that you host with your wife, Straight Talk from the Horse's Mouth. Is that what?
Straight from the Horse Doctor's Mouth.
Tell me about that and what you guys do on that thing.
Straight from the Horse Doctor's Mouth is equine veterinary stuff, as it sounds like. So my wife, being the horse doctor, is a wonderful teacher. And so I interview her because I am not a horse person. And when I met her, I didn't know squat about horses. So I interview her about all kinds of horse health related topics that average horse owners need to know about to become better horse owners. Because one of the things that I've learned going out to see emergencies with her in the middle of the night and being around the vet clinic is that a lot of people have horses and really don't know anything about them. Like things that seem like they should be basic knowledge from the doctor side of things just really aren't, because there's a million things to know, right? And the average person probably knows 100 things out of those million. So we're trying to raise that to maybe 200, because it's the more you know, the better you can do to prevent horrible things from happening to your horse. So that's our goal, is to make the world a better place for horses through educating their owners. And you can find that at any podcast host. We have a lot of kids who are aspiring equine veterinarians that listen to it too. So if you would like to become a horse vet someday, it's a useful resource for that too.
All right. Well, that's terrific. Justin, it's been great talking to you. And everybody, let's check out his book, The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy, available at Amazon and other online booksellers. Thank you very much, Justin. Great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate all your time. This has been great.
So now we're going to take a quick break, but I'll be right back after this message. Hey, thanks guys for hanging in there with us. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and you'll come back on a regular basis. Longtime listeners know that we provide narrations of commentary published almost every day on notfakenews.biz. But we're also including newsmaker interviews, and we're going beyond the world of politics for those. presenting guests and topics that I hope you find interesting and enlightening, like this one with Justin Long. And I'm thrilled that my old boss from Capitol Hill days, former Governor Jim Florio of New Jersey, is co-hosting some of these interview shows with me. He offers a great deal of insight from his long career in politics and public policy. You should keep an eye out for those episodes, which stream just about every other week. So that's just another reason for you to follow NFN Radio News so you don't miss an episode. And check out notfakenews.biz too, where you'll find new material just about every day by some excellent writers with perspectives on a whole range of topics. You can sign up as a member at notfakenews.biz. And of course, it's all free. Also, let your friends know about this podcast and about notfakenews.biz. Our goal is to be informative and entertaining as we comment on the latest developments in the news. This is Bob Gaddy signing off for NFN Radio News and notfakenews.biz.